you new here? Maybe you're still absorbing through experience what our values are and what we're desiring them to be. Maybe you're thinking about your own values and how they come out as you spend time in community with us. Perhaps one of these parts will let you know where you are most often and where there's still room to grow into. Okay, part one, observe. I start with the very practical. Values are formed and shaped in relationship, in community. Some are observed consciously and some unconsciously. A flag that you've absorbed a value unconsciously is when you find yourself reacting strongly in defense of something and you're not quite sure why. There are two types of values. One, instrumental. These are about desirable ways to act and behave, like being honest, being loving, being responsible. And then there's terminal values. These are about desired end states, like health, or freedom, or security. It has been stated that values, beliefs, and attitudes are formed over time through the influence of family and friends, society, and life experiences. Values have been described as an enduring belief upon which a person acts. Again, a value is an enduring belief upon which a person acts. Let me give you an example of experiencing someone's held value. My family and I moved back into this community after being gone for 13 years. A lot changes in that time. We had only made it a few steps into the church that first Sunday after returning when two people immediately met us, one after the other. Marlene and Teresa enveloped us with such a warm welcome. We were remembered. We were wanted and with excitement. Here, the value of caring and of welcome was experienced, and the depth of its impact and beauty was forever ingrained in that moment. Experiencing their held value informed my own. It shaped my understanding of the power it held when expressed wholeheartedly. I pause. But understand this. Different values for accomplishing the same task or goal can yield very different results. For example, there was a 2009 study where two groups were given the task of completing a puzzle. In the first case, people were primed with the achievement value. It was found that yes, it increased the success of completing the puzzle, but it made them less helpful. The value of achievement led them to act in ways that seemed likely to support, achievement. In another group, people were primed with the benevolence value. It decreased their success at the puzzle, but it increased their helpfulness. They had a very different way in how they approached solving the puzzle. Even though the task is the same, the outcome will be different depending on the value that is lived out. We can't live as Christ's body and expect the outcome that we want without paying attention to the values that we are grounded in, that we are living out of. Values have great pull and sway. Thus, anchoring to our why is key. Here are why. To commit our hearts to God, our community, and each other. Now, before I move into part two, let's have just a really quick reflection. Have you thought much about values? Why they matter? Does the power of values lived catch your attention or interest? Okay, part 2, insight. And I love this because now is the how. How does God breathe life into our values? Insight. In his 3 years of walking with his disciples, Jesus modeled a pattern. Nearing his death, Jesus and his disciples sit around a table observing Passover. It is here where Jesus begins the process of clarification. What you witnessed and what that means for you now. In the first 11 verses of John 14, Jesus is preparing his disciples for a big shift in their lived reality. And he is using the establishment of a pattern to help. It is the conscious welcome into the circle of abiding that Jesus will repeatedly point out as how he has been operating, and they, in fact, have been witnessing and absorbing, which is testified to as belief. 6 times, Jesus used the word believe, whether as an encouragement to continue in it, or as an exhortation to remember what you believe. Jesus' physical walking alongside them is about to shift to the dwelling of his Spirit within them. But as we all know, change causes fear. Yep, change can cause fear. Now, before I dive in, let me share a personal story. For months now, I have been fairly consistent at walking as a time to just slow down, be more aware, more present, so I can return my attention to God. Doing something physical helps me in so many ways. So just last week, after a rain the night before, I was walking along our laneway. I was on the last leg of my route when all of a sudden, I saw tracks. They were not dog, deer, or moose. They were decidedly different. After the shock and surprise of seeing it, I tracked the tracks. It headed down our laneway, and yeah, I confirmed they had been made after I had driven in the night before. They were headed towards the highway, but then they took a sharp turn north and stayed on our land. So I sent some pictures to my kids and Ray just to see what they thought it was, but my guess was bear. While waiting, I walked back to the yard, keeping a sharp eye out for more tracks. And I found some. The bear had walked right through our yard, up to my shop, and then towards the back shop. Seeing that was even more unsettling. Feeling fear disrupts our normal, our comfort. But it also asks us, can we put our values into action? Can we live out what we believe in stress? These tracks disrupted my ability to enter what that time of walking had become for me. I was hyper alert. I was looking for more tracks. I was listening for sounds and movement. The last thing that was on my mind or being able to feel in my body was the reason I walk in the first place. For peace, for focus, for love. So, in the fact that Jesus was going to leave them physically, fear hits home. And this is what Jesus starts by addressing. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In other words, don't let fear make you miss what you know, what you value, what you are invited into. Don't let fear make you miss what you know, what you value, and what you are invited into. Jesus continues to walk them through what they can know and need to remember. In my my Father's house there are many dwelling places. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. He's saying, my leaving is in form only. You belong with me. Feel my peace. Where I am, there you will be also. It is here that Jesus gives two insights that are meant to stretch what they know beyond the immediate and the physical. The first insight is that the disciples actually know the way to where Jesus is going. The second is that they have already seen the Father. With both of these insights, Jesus challenges them to remember what they know, to recall what they have witnessed and in fact already believe. Jesus explained that he is how they'll know the way. By abiding in him, they will come to the Father, which leads right into the second insight. If you know me, and you will if you are abiding in me, you will know the Father. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Now, while the disciples may have been able to even tentatively hang on to that knowing piece, it's the seeing side that they question. And so Jesus begins teaching them how to see by asking them to recall the pattern that he modeled, by asking them to remember what they believe. Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you I do not speak on my own, but it is the Father who dwells in me who does his work. Jesus is saying, I am not only his reflection, his representation, I am his presence. He repeats, believe in me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe me because of the works themselves. You have literally experienced the generosity of the Father when you ate with the 5,000. You literally felt the empathy and compassion of the Father when I healed over and over. The boy with seizures, the woman that continually bled, your mother-in-law, Peter. You literally experienced the posture of the Father in the merciful and redeeming welcome for the tax collector, the lepers, those outside the system. And here is where clarity of what you already know and believe by experience, that they in fact are already in relationship with the Father. Through Jesus, they know the Father. That they in fact have seen him as they have seen Jesus. The insights that are stretching them to go deeper into what they know and can see finds them ready to slip seamlessly into part 3. Before we go there, quick reflection. Have you had experiences where the penny drops and you realize the implications or natural outcomes of what you believe? It's that if-then paradigm. If I believe this, then that means ... How far into it have you gone? And now we slide into part 3, invitation. Insight and revelation extends an invitation. Obeying my commands is love in relationship. We left insight on verse 11. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, but if you do not, then believe me because of the works themselves. Well, verse 12 picks up, very truly I tell you. Let me make a note here. Right here is the beginning of many repetitions of how abiding invites response and action. Abiding invites response and action. Very truly I tell you, the one who believes will do what I do. even greater because I am going to the Father. Verses 13 to 15 are brilliant because it's establishing the relationship Jesus modeled with the Father as the relationship they are now entering. I will do whatever you ask in my name so that, okay, I gotta pause right there. Whenever you study or meditate on the scriptures, always place a close attention to the howevers, the therefores, and the so that's. Okay, I resume. I will do whatever you ask in my name so that the Father will be glorified in the Son, which is followed by repetition number 2 of abiding invites response. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Commandment keeping is born out of love. And here is where verse 15 needs to be attached to 13 and 14. To love Jesus, your default becomes to hear, to see, to speak, to do, to soak in him and his ways. In the love we exchange, it then overflows to how we relate, how we see, how we treat all people and all things. The disciples, who are likely just barely fending off the fear that distracts, may have been thinking, okay, this is great, but if you're not physically here, how are we attached? How is our love communicated? Jesus addresses that now in the introduction of the Advocate, the Spirit of truth who abides within us. Why this form of you, Jesus? Knowing the why is profoundly important. Because I will not leave you orphaned. You are mine. With the Spirit, you are joining me in the pattern I've been modeling. And remember what I just explained. You will see me. Because I live, you will live. You will know me. By the end of chapter 15, verse 17, 8 times Jesus uses repetition of how abiding invites response and action. Abiding is our grounding. Abiding is our grounding. Jesus has done a lot of head and heart work around this table, and he now returns to assurance. Yes, fear is tenacious. I'm telling you while I'm still with you, and he's done a lot of that the night before his death. The Holy Spirit, the Advocate, will teach, will remind, will be my presence in you. Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. And I give in ridiculous portions, not like the world. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. I've told you before it occurs so that when it does occur, you may believe. Verse 31 says, but I do as the Father has commanded me, so that all may know that I love the Father. Why do I want the world to know that I love the Father? Because loving him means I'm emulating him. I'm displaying who he is. And then they leave the supper table. All this underlining with repetition, pointing out what they actually knew through witness and experience, explaining the shift in form, what it would be and why, is the brilliant setup to facing change where fear is assuaged, where fear is met head on. Remember my bear track story? Well, let me finish it. I left it where I was no longer fulfilling the purpose of my walking. Instead, fear kept me alert and distracted. Ray had wanted me to take a gun if I insisted walking alone, but that didn't resonate with what I valued about being in the woods in the first place. So not wanting to lose my time walking, but not wanting to barge potentially violently into nature, insisting on my own way, a creative idea sparked. Noise. Now, there isn't much not on our place if you know where to look. And I remember Ray having an air horn on a shelf. So off I went, and success followed. In no time, Ray had me fixed up with my air horn on a carabiner attached to my belt loop. I didn't even have to carry anything. And I'm telling you, I'm testifying, I wasn't far into my walk when I realized my whole body had relaxed. Yes, the bear could still be there. The tracks made me realize there could be any number of dangers I hadn't been dwelling on, but I had a plan. I was meeting my values, and my purpose for the walk was restored. Without altering the situation, I was now at peace. The invitation to enter the relationship of abiding and how is on the table. This is where the establishment and flourishing of values really gains life and color. But before we enter part 4, quick reflection. Can you recall an experience where action literally spilled out because of the Spirit's movement within? What was the truth being underlined in those moments? Maybe it was God revealing his nature again. Maybe it was assurance. Maybe it was a bold call into new areas with him. And we land now on part 4, infilling. I am the vine, and my Father is the vine grower. As he has been doing, Jesus starts with himself and the Father. The Father prunes every branch that does not bear fruit, and every branch that does bear fruit, so it will bear even more. Remember, values are formed over time and through influence, which denotes relationship. There is a constant exchange. Jesus then switches from himself and the Father to himself and the disciples. Abide in me as I abide in you, and you will bear fruit. There's a lack of life in the loss of connection. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified in this. How is he glorified? He is glorified in the loving relationship between you that allows us to be filled with his perspective, his words, his love, his acts. Because honestly, when I look at values sometimes, they can be daunting, knowing my own lack of strength, especially in stress and fear. But my aha moment, that came on a walk, by the way, was that in the abiding, we are actually offered and can receive Jesus' strength of character in us, his depth of insight in us, his compassion and his empathy of love into our own selves. Remember, we are his body. This is it coming alive. There's no conundrum of, oh, what will I ask for? Or, oh, how will I know what is right? You speak what you hear Jesus saying. You do what you see Jesus doing, as he has done with the Father. Our surrender in this way of ourselves, in love, for love, as a response to love, reveals who the Father is. It glorifies him. And then Jesus throws in another assurance. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. So now we've walked through facing fear, We've tagged along as Jesus clarified what they believed, what truths and what fruit was revealing, and what then that meant, the invitation. And even though there would be a form shift, having Jesus abide within as opposed to walking beside, no truths are lost. In fact, more are gained. Within the fruit of abiding, now you will do what I've been doing. Again, no truths are lost. In fact, more are gained. Within the fruit of abiding, now you will do what I've been doing. Your relationship with me is the relationship I modeled between myself and the Father, which means we come to part number 5. But quick reflection. Have you experienced a time when you did something way, way beyond yourself?
Yeah.
Maybe in action, maybe emotionally, maybe in understanding? Have you ever experienced a peace that just didn't make sense? Want to spend more time being a branch? He will help you. To conclude, part number 5, overflow. You will love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Jesus is saying, I've explained the relationship between you and me. Now remember the pattern of how I loved you while I was here. This is how I will now ask you to love those around you. You are my friends, for whom I'm laying down my life. If you do as I command, keep abiding. The final 2 so that's. I appointed you to go bear fruit so that the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you love one another. Sure, the tenacity of fear is a reality, but so is the tenacity of our values. Therefore, let us consciously anchor all our values to our why, to commit our hearts to God, our community, and one another, as well as our how. Abide in me as I abide in you, so that you love one another, and you will bear fruit. This is how God breathes life into our values. Spiritual growth continues when we purposefully live in a united and loving community that abides in God.